Stop for Short by Frieda Friedman. Illustrated by Carolyn Haywood. Copyright 1947. Chapter 10. Dot Goes to a Party. One hot morning towards the end of August, the downstairs bell rang. Dot, Fluff, Peg, and Mike all recognized the postman's ring, but no one moved. On a cooler day there would have been a scramble to see who could get the key first, run downstairs, open the letter box, and find out who was receiving a letter. Today, though, the thought of getting mail wasn't thrilling enough to make any of the four Flemings want to walk down and up 2 flights of stairs. Each one of them was curious about what the letter box held, but no one had enough energy to find out. After a few moments, Dot's curiosity won over her laziness. There was just the possibility that the letter in the box was for her, although she could not imagine who would be writing to her. Dot took the letter box key from the kitchen shelf and started downstairs. She passed many open doors on the way, for on days like this the people in the building left their doors open to get more air. In the hall there were 4 rows of letter boxes, 5 to a row. They were exactly alike, and before Dot put her key in the box that had Fleming written in it, she glanced at the other mailboxes. Wasn't it strange that objects which were so identical could hold such different kinds of letters? Even on an ordinary August day like this one, some of the boxes probably held news that was cheerful and pleasant, some sad, some exciting. How thrilling it would be, thought Dot, to read the mail in every box. It would be like reading 50 or more different stories. Dot opened the Fleming box and drew out 2 small envelopes. To her surprise, one was addressed to her and one to Fluff. Miss Dorothea Ann Fleming. How important that name looked on an envelope. Dot found herself straightening up tall. In the upper left-hand corner of the envelope was the sender's name and address. The letter was from Margie Roberts. The name brought Dot a picture of the lovely winter coat that had been Margie's and was now hers. She wondered if the weather would ever again be cool enough to wear it. Dot's first impulse was to tear open the envelope and see what was inside, but then she decided to wait. It would be more interesting to read it upstairs. Although the day was so hot, she ran up the 2 flights and rushed into the apartment. "It's for us, Fluff," she called, panting from having hurried so. "For Margie Roberts." Dot handed Fluff her envelope, and then she opened her own. Mommy, Grandma, Peg, and Mike stopped what they were doing and watched Dot and Fluff as they read their notes. Fluff gave an exclamation of delight. "Margie's having a party and Dot and I are invited. It's the last Saturday of August." Dot found a small card in her envelope. Inside there was a printed verse. "I'm having a birthday party, and I'm sending this to say, I'm counting on you to be there. Don't let anything keep you away." Margie had filled in the date of the party, the time, and the address. On Dot's invitation there was an added note. Would Dot invite that nice boy Margie had met at the Flemings'? She wanted more boys at her party, and she didn't know his address. Dot knew that the nice boy meant Pierre. Mike had been watching Dot and Fluff as they read their mail. "Do you suppose the letter meant lost my invitation?" he asked. Mommy said that probably Margie thought he was too young for her party. "But she said she wants more boys," Mike protested. He did not seem satisfied with Mommy's explanation. When the Saturday of the party came, Dot and Fluff took a great deal of time getting dressed. They wanted to look their very nicest. Dot had planned to wear the bracelet that Mommy and Daddy had given her for her birthday. It was very beautiful, and she wore it only on special occasions. It had tiny stones in it, and if you took the initial of each stone, starting with the diamond, you had the word Dearest. There was a diamond, an emerald, an amethyst, a ruby, another emerald, a sapphire, and a topaz. They were imitation stones, of course, but Dot was sure that no bracelet with genuine stones could be half as beautiful. She opened the top drawer of the dresser where she always kept it. To her surprise, the bracelet wasn't there. She looked in all the other drawers, even those belonging to Peg. There was no bracelet. She called to Fluff to ask her if she had seen it, but Fluff hadn't. Peg, Grandma, and Mommy said they hadn't either. Daddy was out driving his taxi, and Mike was playing downstairs, but those 2 never knew where anything was anyway. Everyone in the apartment helped Dot search. When the bell rang, Dot, almost ready to cry with disappointment, realized that she would have to go to the party without the bracelet. Pierre was here, and she did not want to keep him and Fluff waiting. Dot thought that Pierre looked very nice in his Sunday suit. His dark hair, cut short now, was brushed back, and his dark eyes were glowing with excitement. This would be his first real party since he had come from France. Pierre's accent was disappearing, and he was not as timid as he had been. He was getting along well in school, too. As soon as he had learned a little English, he had been promoted rapidly. When the school began again, he and Dot would be in the same grade. Looking at Pierre now, as he talked to Mommy and Grandma, Dot felt a little pang of jealousy. If Pierre lost his accent, if he outgrew his shyness, he might not depend so much on the friendship of the Flemings. Dot was ashamed of herself for these thoughts. She should be glad that Pierre was getting along so well. She knew that he would be happy if good things happened to her. If she won the limerick contest, he would be almost as happy as her family. If, by Thanksgiving, she would know that she had not won, and then she could stop daydreaming. Until then, though, it seemed impossible to Dot not to think and hope. The search for the bracelet made Fluff, Dot, and Pierre a little late for the party. They could hear the radio playing loud dance music when they rang the bell of the Robertses' apartment. They could hear the buzz of voices and the pleasant sound of laughter. It was plain that the people inside were having a very good time. Margie, as plump and cheerful as ever, welcomed them and led them into the living room where many girls and boys were dancing. One boy, who was not dancing just then, came toward Fluff the minute she entered the room. He asked her if she would like to dance. Fluff flashed her brightest smile, and in a second she and the boy were whirling across the floor. Again Dot felt the loneliness that she so often did when she was in a crowd. Pierre was tall, and he would probably consider her too small to be his partner. He would choose one of Margie's taller, prettier guests. She looked up and saw that Pierre was on the point of saying something, but that he was hesitating. "Dot," he said after a minute, "I want to ask you to dance, but I dance so badly I don't think I should." With a feeling of relief and pleasure, Dot held her arms out. They started to dance, and although Pierre did not dance as well as Fluff's partner, he was not bad either. Once, when he hesitated for a second, he said to Dot, "I would have never had the courage to ask anyone but you." Dot was glad that he hadn't. The sound of the radio was loud, but not half so loud as the sound of the doorbell. Someone must have put a finger firmly on the bell and kept it there. Everyone stopped dancing. One of the boys clicked off the radio. A ring as loud as that must surely mean something important. Mrs. Roberts opened the door. Dot could not see who was outside, but she heard a low voice that sounded familiar. Then she heard Mrs. Roberts' voice, loud and friendly, saying, "Why, I'm so glad you're here. Come right in with me and meet the others." "Someone is even later than we were," thought Dot. When she saw who the someone was, she could hardly believe her eyes. Mrs. Roberts was leading a boy with red hair, freckles, and downcast blue eyes. He looked shy and a little frightened. In his hand he held a bracelet. "Everyone meet Mike Fleming," said Mrs. Roberts. "He's Fluff's brother and Dot's." Still looking shy and frightened, Mike took a step toward Dot and held out the bracelet. "I found it after you'd gone, and I knew you'd want it," he said in a low voice that was very different from his usual shout. Dot flushed as everyone watched her put on the bracelet. She guessed that Mike had hidden it so he would have an excuse to come to the party. She didn't know whether she wanted to laugh or to shake her brother. "I guess I'll go now," said Mike to Mrs. Roberts, but he didn't move a step. Mrs. Roberts put an arm around Mike and said he would do nothing of the kind. He'd stay for the treasure hunt and for something to eat. Mike considered the matter very seriously. Then he agreed to stay, because he didn't have anything more important to do. When he looked at Dot, the shy expression he had been wearing had changed to one of triumph. Margie clapped her hands for attention and said they were going on a treasure hunt. All over the apartment there were written clues. You might find one anywhere. At the end of the hunt, the lucky person would find a treasure. Was everyone ready? The room was tense with excitement as Margie slowly counted to 3. Then noise broke loose as everyone rushed to a different part of the apartment. Dot found clues in the most unexpected places. She saw a desk calendar and decided she'd flip through the pages. Sure enough, back on June 6th, she saw a little scrawled note that said, "A big man finds a volume of clues." Volume. That must be a hint. Flushed and excited because she felt that she was nearing the end of the hunt, Dot went back into the living room. She scanned the names of the books in the bookcase. When she saw a book with the title Longfellow's Poems, her heart gave a leap of happiness. This book must hold the next clue. Big man. Longfellow would mean that. Poor Pierre. He would have a hard time with this because he was a foreigner and probably wouldn't realize the connection between the words. Just as Dot was about to open the book of poetry, she heard a shout, "I have the treasure! I have the treasure!" It was Pierre's voice. He had won. Everyone rushed into the living room and crowded around Pierre, who held up a long, narrow box. He was breathing fast from excitement and from surprise at his own victory. "Open it!" shouted Mike in his usual loud voice. Pierre was too excited to think of anything practical. With trembling fingers he opened the box and held up a fountain pen. There was more shouting and everyone wanted to examine the pen. Dot felt almost as pleased as if she had won the prize herself. After the treasure hunt there was a scramble to find the right places at the table. There were place cards, but they had no names on them. Mrs. Roberts said Margie had drawn pictures instead. When you found the picture that meant you sat down. For instance, Dot found a card that had nothing on it but a big red dot. Pierre's eyes glowed when he found a card that had a flag in each corner, one the flag of the country in which he had been born, the other the flag of his adopted country. Mike, to his delight, had a place card too. Mrs. Roberts must have hurried to make it. There was a picture of the rear end of a dog. All you could see were the two paws and a little tail. On the card were the words, "Coming in at the tail end." Next to each plate there was a snapper with a fortune in it. Dot jumped when the snappers went off. One by one the guests read their fortunes. Dot said, "Some very good news is coming your way. You'll hear it after a little delay." Very good news! That meant only one thing to Dot. The limerick contest. Her voice quivered with excitement when she read the two lines aloud. Then she wanted to shake herself for being so silly. Fortunes were fun, but that was all. Mike's fortune was proof of that. Everyone roared with laughter when he read it. "Get over being so quiet and shy, and you'll be successful by and by." The girls and boys at the party were surprised at how quickly Mike had gotten over his shyness. It was after 5 when the guests started for home. Margie kept saying over and over again, "Must you go so early?" She kept coaxing her guests to stay longer. Fluff, Dot, Mike, and Pierre were the last ones to leave. Every time Margie had suggested that they stay longer, Mike had said, "Okay, we'll stay a little longer." Now it was really getting late, and they had to go. Back at home, Fluff, Mike, and Dot kept interrupting one another as they told the rest of the family about the party, about the treasure hunt, the place cards, the delicious things they had eaten, the big, beautiful apartment in which Margie lived. As Dot remembered Margie's apartment, the Fleming living room seemed to get smaller and smaller. Dot had never realized how small it really was, or how much noise the Third Avenue L trains made as they rushed by. "Didn't you think Margie looked sad when we left?" Fluff asked Dot. Dot said she had noticed too, but she couldn't imagine why Margie should be sad. "It's because she hasn't any sisters or brothers," Mike said, "and her daddy's hardly ever home. With us, it's always like a party." Dot realized that Mike was smarter than she usually gave him credit for being. The party had been exciting and wonderful, but having a brother and sisters, a daddy who told stories about his passengers, a beautiful mother, and a loving, understanding grandma, these were even more exciting and more wonderful. All that Dot really wanted now was one thing. To herself she recited the fortune that she had pulled out of the snapper. "Some very good news is coming your way. You'll hear it after a little delay." Chapter 11. A Disappointing Broadcast. The winners will be announced by radio and letter by Thanksgiving. Dot had read and reread the rules for the limerick contest so often that she knew every word by heart. It was the sentence about the winners that she kept repeating to herself, by Thanksgiving. How far away that had seemed at first! How close it was now! Ever since Dot had submitted her limerick, she had been counting the days until Thanksgiving. At first there were so many that she decided to count the number of Thursdays between that particular day and Thanksgiving Day. Counting Thursdays was more encouraging. Lying in bed each night, Dot would recite her limerick to herself, trying to judge it as if someone else had written it. Sometimes she thought it was good. At other times she felt that anyone would know it had been written by a 10-year-old girl. Sometimes she wished Thanksgiving Day would hurry, and at other times she dreaded its coming. Until that important day she could dream about all the things she would do with the $10,000, but after the fourth Thursday in November there would be nothing to hope for except that the doctor had been mistaken about Daddy. The advertisement said that the Muffin Masterpiece Company had a 15-minute program every Wednesday at 5 o'clock. The first Wednesday in November, Dot decided to turn it on. It was just possible that the winners would be announced early in the month instead of later. By Thanksgiving meant any time before Thanksgiving, didn't it? Dot didn't want to miss hearing her name announced. When Dot returned from school one day in the middle of November, she found that Fluff and Peg were already home. They were in the warm kitchen, talking with Mommy and Grandma, and they all looked up when Dot stopped in the doorway to say hello. She was wearing her plaid winter coat. Peg stared at her and burst out laughing. "It's that coat," she explained to Dot. "It was just right last winter, but now it's much too short. It looks as if it belonged to your kid sister." Once Dot would have been delighted to think she had grown so much within the year. Even now she was more pleased than she would admit. As she hung the coat in the closet, she wished that her height were the only thing she had to worry about. How silly she used to be, thinking and worrying because she was so small. If only she could win the contest and help Daddy regain his health. She wouldn't care whether she was tall or short, plump or thin, dark or light. Still, thought Dot, looking at herself in the mirror over her bureau, it would be nice to be as tall and pretty as Fluff and Peg. When Dot joined the others in the kitchen, they were talking about Thanksgiving. Fluff had asked whether or not they were going to have a big dinner. "I guess we will," Mommy told her. Dot thought that Mommy's voice did not sound as happy as it used to. "If turkey's too high this year, we can have goose or duck." "Why, of course we'll have a big Thanksgiving dinner," Grandma interrupted. She bent over the kettle that was bubbling on the stove, and she tasted the soup that was in it. Grandma nodded and smacked her lips. "No one in the world makes better soup than I do," she announced. No one disagreed with her. Mommy might sew better or iron better, but all the Flemings, including Daddy, agreed that Grandma was the best cook in the whole world. "That decides it then," said Mommy to Grandma. "If you want to cook a big Thanksgiving dinner, we'll have one. After all, we do have a lot to be thankful for. We're all happy and—" She stopped. The worried look that Dot had seen come and go on Mommy's face was there again. Did Mommy know about Daddy too? Dot wondered. "What were you going to say? We're all happy and what?" asked Peg. Mommy busied herself at the closet, taking plates down from the shelves. Her back was turned to the others so they did not see her face. "I was going to say we're all happy and healthy, but your Daddy doesn't look well these days. The cold weather doesn't seem to agree with him." The small kitchen was hot because there were so many people in it and because the oven was lighted, but in spite of the heat Dot felt a chill. It was only November. December, January, February, and March were still ahead before warm weather came back again. Dot repeated the months in her mind, and never had 4 words seemed to stretch out so. She walked to the kitchen window and looked out across the court. There were clotheslines stretched from the kitchen windows of every apartment to a big pole in the middle of the court. Dot could tell by the washing on the line which families had babies and which had older children, which families used tablecloths and which didn't. She noticed on the clothesline right below the Flemings that there were many handkerchiefs out to dry. Mrs. Adams must have a cold, Dot thought. In the middle of a neighbor's line hung a man's long union suit. It looked so funny waving in the breeze that Dot chuckled. Then, as she looked at the clothesline, she noticed white specks swirling through the air. They were no bigger than the white dots on the chocolate pennies that Dot often bought at the candy store, but she knew what they meant. They were the first sign of a long winter. The door opened and slammed shut with such a bang that the big kettle of soup trembled a little. Mike rushed into the kitchen, his cheeks as red as his hair, his blue eyes sparkling. "It's snowing!" he shouted. "Isn't that swell? It's snowing!" "But it isn't sticking to the ground," complained Fluff, after she had gone into the living room to look out of the window. "I like snow to come down hard and really stick." "I bet we'll have a white Thanksgiving," Peg said happily. "And speaking of Thanksgiving, Mike, we're going to have a big dinner." Mike's grin spread a little further. "Let's invite Pierre," he suggested. "In France he never ate a Thanksgiving dinner. Can you beat that?" Fluff looked at her brother in her most superior way. "Michael Fleming, don't you learn anything in school?" she asked. "Thanksgiving is an American holiday. It was the Pilgrims who started it right here in this country." "I'm sure glad they did," Mike told her. "Anyway, whoever started it, let's invite Pierre." Dot wanted to hug her younger brother. She herself had wanted to suggest that Pierre come to dinner, but she was afraid that Peg and Fluff would tease her. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Dot's thoughts kept wandering as she sat in her classroom. Once, when her teacher called on her, Dot had to admit that she hadn't heard the question. The class giggled, and Dot's cheeks turned red and hot with embarrassment. Later, Pierre told her that Miss Walker had only asked her what she was thinking about. The thing that Dot had been thinking about was the 5 o'clock radio program. By Thanksgiving, the contest rules had said. That meant tonight at the latest. On her way home, Dot thought about that other exciting day in April when she had recited in the assembly. She remembered saying to herself then, "By tomorrow, what will I be remembering?" She was asking herself the same thing now. Tomorrow, as she ate her Thanksgiving dinner with her family and Pierre, would she have something wonderful to be thankful for, or would all her hopes be gone? There were less than 2 hours between the time that Dot reached home and the time of the radio broadcast. Never had 2 hours seemed so long to Dot. Every few minutes she would go into the kitchen and look at the Big Ben clock on the icebox. Once Grandma, not understanding her interest in the time, told her to eat some crackers with jelly if she was very hungry. This was one time, thought Dot, when Grandma could not read her mind, or she would know that Dot was not at all interested in supper. Just before 5, she clicked on the radio and impatiently listened to the noisy hum that always came when it was first turned on. Today it seemed to last longer than usual. Dot hoped that the winners weren't being announced during that time. Then the hum ended, and a man's voice, very loud and proud, announced the station. Dot turned the right-hand dial so that the program would come in very softly. No one in the Fleming family knew that she had entered the contest, and Dot did not want them to hear the names of the winners. If they did, and if Dot's name was not among them, Mike would say, "So that's why you kept listening to that corny program on Wednesdays. You thought you'd win." Peg and Fluff would laugh condescendingly and say that contests weren't for children, and even they, at their ages, wouldn't think of entering one. Mommy's eyes would be filled with sympathy. Grandma would say indignantly that Dot's limerick was no doubt the best of all, but the winners were friends of the judges. They would all feel very sorry for her, and Dot didn't want sympathy. Losing would be hard enough, but her family's sympathy would make it even harder. A trio sang a popular song. Then a man's voice said, "And now for the news you've all been waiting for, the winners of the Muffin Masterpiece Contest." Dot leaned forward in her chair so she wouldn't miss a word. She held her breath. The man on the radio told what a hard time the judges had because all the limericks were so good. He said that reminded him of a story. "Stop wasting time," Dot told him fiercely under her breath. After telling the story, the man said, "The winner, the lucky lady who gets $10,000 outright, or $25 a week for 10 years, is Mrs. Eleanor Wilson of Santa Cruz, California. Congratulations, Mrs. Wilson." The thing Dot most wanted to do at that moment was to rush into her bedroom, fling herself face down on the bed, and cry. But Peg was already in the bedroom, and she would think that Dot had gone crazy. Over the air came the sounds of an orchestra, then the man's voice again. Dot sat forward. Her forehead was wet with perspiration. The winner of the second prize was a man. Dot did not listen to his name or address. Again the orchestra played, and after the song had ended, the announcer returned a third time. This time Dot did not sit forward in her chair. The name would not be hers, she was sure. It wasn't. "The last name that I have time to announce," said the man, "is Miss Gladys Manfred of St. Petersburg, Florida." Almost sick with disappointment, Dot snapped off the radio, walked to the window, and pressed her face against the pane. Her head ached. She had been hoping so long and so hard that now she wondered what there was left to think about. Outside the snow was falling in big, thick flakes. It covered the tops of the autos and trolley cars down below on Third Avenue. It covered the window sills and the fire escapes. On the street, boys were making fat snowballs and throwing them at one another. They shouted happily when a snowball hit a friend, and they ran away when one hit an angry stranger. Dot could hear Mike's loud voice above the others. Winter was really here, and Daddy would have to spend it in New York. "Supper's almost ready, Dot," Grandma said in her brisk voice. "You were in such a hurry before that you can help set the table." Dot did not tell Grandma that her hurry had not been for supper, but for an announcement that she would never, never hear. Chapter 12. Thanksgiving Day Arrives. Although there was no school on Thanksgiving Day, there was plenty of work to do at home, and all the Flemings awoke early. The dusting was Dot's job. As she had dusted the bureau in her own room, she could hear Mommy's voice through the thin wall that separated the two bedrooms. Mommy's voice sounded worried, as it often did these days. "But Jim, must you go out today?" she was saying. "It's Thanksgiving, and it's snowing hard." "Two very good reasons why I should be out earning some extra money," answered Daddy in his teasing voice. He went on to explain that on Thanksgiving Day and other holidays people dressed in their very best. If it was raining or snowing, the first thing they did was to hop into a taxi, and what's more, they felt good because it was a holiday, so they gave big tips. "Not that we need the money, of course," said Daddy. Dot, down on her knees dusting the legs of the bureau, thought that his voice had changed in 1 minute. It wasn't really teasing now. It sounded more the way it had the day Daddy told her that the doctor had advised him to go to Florida. Through the wall, Dot could hear Mommy's long sigh. Dot got up from her knees and found herself echoing Mommy's sigh. Her heart felt heavy as she realized there was nothing she could do to help. Nothing at all. When the room was well dusted, Dot went into the living room to continue her work. There she could hear Mike's loud voice coming from the kitchen. "But this is sissy stuff," he was saying. "I can't see why I should have to do it." "I don't see why you should have to eat, either," Grandma said. "Your grandfather never thought it was sissy stuff. He always helped me polish the silver. He used to say it took muscle and patience to polish silver." When Dot went into the kitchen a few minutes later, she found Mike at the table, his lips pressed together. He held up a knife, studied it seriously, frowned, shook his head, and polished some more. Then he studied the knife again, and his face brightened. "Did Grandpa's silver ever look any brighter than this?" he asked. Grandma looked at the knife admiringly and said that Grandpa would be proud of Mike. Mike's freckled face glowed. He whistled as he continued his work. At 1 o'clock Daddy came home, bringing Pierre with him. They had met downstairs. Pierre's cap and Daddy's hat were covered with snow. They stamped their feet before they came into the apartment. Before Pierre took his coat off, he put a red, chapped hand into his pocket and drew out 2 bars of chocolate. He presented 1 bar to Mommy and the other to Grandma. "I read in a magazine," he said, "that when you go to someone's house for dinner, it is nice to bring candy. I didn't have money enough for a box of candy, so I brought you these." Mommy squeezed Pierre's hand. "How thoughtful of you," she said. "We have everything but candy for dinner. We'll divide these." Grandma read the wrapper on her bar of chocolate. "With almonds," she murmured. "My favorite kind of candy. I really don't know whether I want to divide mine." Pierre looked very pleased at his success. The table had been moved into the middle of the room, and there were 2 extra boards in it so that 8 people could sit around it comfortably. You could tell just by looking at it that today was a holiday. Mommy had put on the best tablecloth, a big lace one that almost reached the floor. As far back as Dot could remember, this cream-colored lace tablecloth had meant something especially nice. It was used for birthdays and for Peg's graduation from elementary school. If only, thought Dot, it meant something special today, something even more special than Thanksgiving. But it was too late to think of that now. Pierre looked at the table set with the best china and silverware. His eyes glowed with admiration. Dot thought he was admiring the lace tablecloth, but she was mistaken, for Pierre said, "Never have I ever seen silver that shone so." "I did that," Mike explained quickly, before Pierre could think that Mommy or Grandma was responsible. "My grandfather always helped my grandmother with the silver, and now I'm taking over. It takes patience and muscle to do a good polishing job." "Everyone come to the table," said Mommy, showing Pierre where he was to sit. There was half a grapefruit at each place, and in its yellow center was a bright red cherry. On the table were dishes of red cranberry sauce, green olives, and white stalks of celery. Everything looked gay and pretty. Across the table Dot's eyes met Daddy's, and she knew that he was trying to tell her something. Dot could read the message in Daddy's eyes. It told her to cheer up and not to look so worried. If he could pretend that everything was all right, couldn't she? "Do you know," said Mommy when they were all seated, "I think we ought to say grace. We really do have a lot to be thankful for." "I have most of all," said Pierre, looking from one to the other. "I have a new country to be thankful for, and good friends like all of you." "We're thankful for your friendship too, dear," said Grandma. "I think I'll lower the light under the turkey." "Turkey! Say, that is something to be thankful for!" exclaimed Daddy. "No one told me we were going to have turkey." Grandma said that she hadn't meant to announce it. It was to be a surprise. She said she had been looking forward to all the oohs and ahs when she brought it to the table, and now she had given the secret away. Daddy said they'd pretend that she hadn't told them a thing, and when the turkey arrived they'd ooh and ah their very loudest. Just as he was saying this, the doorbell rang. Everyone at the table looked at everyone else. "Any of your boy friends, Peg?" Daddy asked. Peg blushed. Fluff said it was probably some kids begging. Lots of boys and girls dressed in their mother's or father's clothes on Thanksgiving Day and went from door to door asking for food or pennies. Daddy put his hand in his pocket to see if he had any small change. The bell rang again, this time louder and longer and more important sounding. Everyone knew that the ring wasn't made by a child begging. Grandma, who had gone into the kitchen to lower the flame under the turkey, pressed the button. The tick, tick, tick was the only sound that could be heard in the living room. Everyone looked up expectantly, wondering who would be coming at this hour on Thanksgiving Day. In a minute Grandma opened the upstairs door. "Special delivery for Dorothea Ann Fleming," said a man's voice. "Hope it's good news." "Thank you, and a happy Thanksgiving," said Grandma. Dot wondered whether she could possibly have heard correctly. Had someone said "special delivery for Dorothea Ann Fleming," or had she imagined it? It must be somebody playing a trick. Mike, perhaps. She looked at her brother, but his face was serious and innocent. "For you, Dot," said Grandma, giving her a letter. Now the room was absolutely still. Everyone was looking up at Dot as she stood holding the letter, wondering what it could be, afraid to open it. This wasn't real. No one would send her a special delivery letter. It was Mike's impatient voice that made her stop dreaming. "Ain't you ever going to open it?" he asked. Dot realized how foolish she must look, standing beside her chair with an unopened letter in her hand. She tore open the envelope and read the short paragraph. There was something else in the envelope, too, a long, narrow piece of paper with figures on it. Dot knew what it was, a check. Holding her breath, Dot looked at it. After all the hoping and all the disappointment, this was too exciting to take calmly. She opened her mouth to give a shout of joy and to tell everyone the wonderful news, but the shout did not come. There was a big lump in Dot's throat. No amount of swallowing would make it go away, and no amount of blinking would stop the tears that were filling Dot's eyes. What would her family think, she wondered? She must stop acting so foolish. She must stop right this minute. Instead of stopping, she found herself rushing to Daddy's big chair near the window. She threw herself into it, hid her face, and burst into tears. All the while, one hand held the special delivery letter and the check. Maybe it wasn't exactly the news Dot had dreamed of, but it was wonderful news just the same. Maybe it wouldn't pay for a college education for the four Flemings, but it would let Mommy and Daddy go to Florida, and that was the real reason Dot had entered the contest. The important thing had been to win enough to give Daddy the vacation he needed so much, and Dot had won it. She could hear the buzz of voices around her. What in the world happened? I guess she isn't feeling well. Dot realized how worried they all were. She held out the letter for someone to take, feeling that it would explain everything. It was Daddy who took it. Dot could tell from the way his hand rumpled her hair. Everyone waited a second or two, and then Daddy gave the great shout of joy that Dot herself had started to give a little while before. Dot thought it was the loudest and happiest shout that she had ever heard. Dot, I'm proud of you, Daddy said. The kids won a prize, $1,000 for a limerick. Can you beat that? Dot looked up to find all the Flemings gathered around her chair. Pierre stood a little in the background, too shy to join the family. Daddy read the letter aloud, the letter that announced that Dorothea Ann Fleming had won fifth prize in the contest, and enclosed was a check for $1,000 for her very clever limerick. Dot's eyes met Pierre's, and his were glowing with pride and happiness. I knew you would, they seemed to say. I knew when I brought the magazine. Yes, it was Pierre who was responsible for Dot's good luck. Half laughing and half crying, she told the others how Pierre had left the magazine that Saturday night when Peg, Fluff, and Mike were working, and how she had looked at the wrong page first. She told them how Pierre had said to Grandma that night, "Dot is the poet." That was to give her confidence. All the Flemings turned to Pierre. Dot was glad to have the attention taken from her for a little while. It gave her time to dry her eyes, blow her nose, and sit up straight in the chair. She felt tired from all the excitement. She wished that she hadn't acted so foolish. If the news had come over the radio last night, she was sure she would have acted differently. It was because she had given up all hope that the good news came as such a shock. Well, kid, what are you going to do with the $1,000? Daddy asked. Then Dot realized that no one, not even Daddy himself, knew why she had entered the contest or why she was so excited at having won. You and Mommy are going to Florida on a vacation with part of the money, she said, and with the other part, Grandma is going to keep everything going up here. Do you think we can do it for $1,000 if we try to save while you're away? Florida! 6 voices exclaimed together. It was funny to hear one word said in so many different voices. It was funny to see the puzzled look on everyone's face but Daddy's. On Daddy's freckled face there was a look of great relief. Will you and Dot stop looking at each other that way and tell us what this is about, Jim? Mommy asked. Daddy told the others about his visit to the doctor's office and how the doctor had advised him to spend the winter in Florida. Daddy told the story gaily as if he were telling about a visit to the Museum of Art. Remembering the tense, worried look on Daddy's face that day and his bitter laugh, Dot realized that her daddy was a wonderful man. To him, the most important thing in the world was to keep Mommy and Grandma from worrying. Looking at her mother and grandmother, Dot realized that they understood all that Daddy was leaving out. Daddy wasn't fooling them at all. When people loved you, they weren't fooled easily, Dot thought. Mrs. Adams has a cousin in Florida who rents rooms. Remember she told us about her? Maybe you and Mommy could leave next week and stay with her, Dot suggested. Listen to the new boss of the house, Daddy said, laughing. Our shy, quiet little Dot solving all the problems. By the way, kid, what did you write in that $1,000 limerick? Dot felt too excited to want to stop and recite a verse about muffins. I don't really think I remember, she said, and anyway, it wasn't very good. Stop being so modest and recite, said Grandma. We'll judge whether it's good or not. The room was quiet while everyone waited for Dot to recite. Nodding her handkerchief the way she had done in the school auditorium many months ago, Dot said in a low voice, For supper we had a real treat. It was muffins in spite of the heat. We forgot the hot day, and here's what we say, Muffin masterpiece just can't be beat. Not bad, said Daddy. Not at all bad. I couldn't have done better myself." "You'd never think a little peanut like that would be so smart, would you?" Mike asked Pierre. Little peanut. The two words sounded familiar. Somehow in the midst of all the happy conversation around her, Dot remembered a day last January. She remembered how she had been walking along Third Avenue and someone had called her a little peanut. She had felt so hurt that she had wanted to cry. She remembered something else about that day last winter. She and Grandma had been telling each other what they wished more than anything else. Dot, how young and foolish she had been then, had wished that she were tall, as if that really mattered. Grandma had wished that the Flemings would all stay the same healthy, happy family that they were that day. Now Dot understood what Grandma meant and how wise she had been. Dot's thoughts were interrupted by Mommy's voice, louder and more excited than usual. "The turkey!" she said. "It will be burning any minute. I'll see about it." She dashed into the kitchen. "I think we should all eat," Mike complained. "Just because Dot got $1,000 is no reason why we should starve on Thanksgiving, is it?" Mommy came back into the living room, her eyes a little moist. Dot guessed that she had run into the kitchen before she broke down and cried. Daddy said that if you remembered as far back as half an hour ago, they were about to say grace. He was all for going ahead and saying it. This was certainly a day of Thanksgiving for him. They bowed their heads. Just before she closed her eyes, Dot looked at the lace tablecloth. Today it was again associated with something happy, with a day that she and the other Flemings would never forget. When Daddy and Mommy returned in the spring, the others would give them a welcome home party and they would have this tablecloth on again. How much they would all have to talk about. Daddy and Mommy would tell all the things that had happened to them in Florida, and the other Flemings would interrupt one another telling the things that had happened in New York. Dot realized that she wasn't saying grace at all, just letting her imagination do whatever it wanted to do. She closed her eyes tight and said a little prayer of thanks. Her prayer was interrupted by Mike's voice saying, "I saved $1 for a dog, Mom, but if you want it to go to Florida, I'll give it to you." "Do you know what I think?" said Mommy. "I think as a going-away present, Mike, Daddy and I will buy you a dog." Mike's whistle was drowned out by the Third Avenue L train that rushed past. "Golly," he said, when the room was quiet again. "This is my idea of a real Thanksgiving."